I think the best book that's been written about this is Jim Douglas's book, which is called The Unspeakable, because he's done something that, after the Warren Commission, that became the orthodoxy. And the New York Times and all the major news organizations have enforced that orthodoxy, and anybody who challenged that orthodoxy becomes a conspiracy theorist. And in fact, in 1967, the CIA sent a letter out to a telecom out to all of its Operation Mockingbird people, which are all the assets it had in the American press, more than 400 people, editors, senior writers in the American press, saying, from now on, anybody who questions the single gunman theory of the Kennedy assassination should be characterized as a conspiracy theorist. And they didn't coin the word conspiracy theory, but they popularized it with that memo. They sent a memo out to all their stations saying that talk should be discouraged. So but what happened after that is then in 1979, the House Assassinations Committee met for a year and a half, and they looked at much more evidence than the Warren Commission did, including, Alan Dulles. Alan Dulles had run the Warren Commission. He was the head of the CIA who my uncle fired. When my uncle died, he said, I'm glad the little shit is dead. He thought he was a god. That's what he said to a young reporter. And then he becomes head of the commission that is, it shouldn't have been called the Warren Commission. It should be called the Dulles, because Earl Warren had a full-time job at the Supreme Court. All the other guys on the Warren Commission had full-time jobs as senator and congressman. The only guy who went to every meeting and, looked at every piece of evidence and developed the questions for the witnesses was Alan Dulles. He was running the entire Warren Commission. And he should have been the prime suspect in the crime. And he was communicating secretly with the people at the CIA, with David Atlee Phillips, with George Johannides, who was the CIA liaison, telling them what questions were going to be asked and what they should reveal, and with J. Edgar Hoover at the same time. Well, the whole thing was a coordinated kind of kabuki theater. But then Congress goes back and investigates it in '79. And Congress then comes back after a year and a half, seeing a lot more stuff, and says, and they conclude this was a conspiracy.
Yes.
So they make that official. So anybody who says it was just Lee Harvey Oswald is differing from the people who actually made the investigation.
So given that,
most of the people on that staff who I've talked to believed that it was the CIA. And as you know, at that time, the dispute between them wasn't the mob of the CIA, because there was a lot of mob involvement. Johnny Roselli, Sam Giancana, who was the Chicago boss, Santos Trafficante, who was the Tampa boss, and Carlos Marcello, who was the New Orleans boss, were all involved. And they all had casinos in Havana. And they were working with the CIA to assassinate Castro. So they had hitmen at their disposal, and they were training Cubans who were sharpshooters for Batista as hitmen. And I've talked to some of the hitmen. I've talked to Antonio Vecchiano, who was involved, and who was also David Atlee Phillips' handler. David Atlee Phillips was his handler, and he was Lee Harvey Oswald's handler. So Vecchiano met Oswald in Dallas I think in September of 1963. Oh, I've talked to, the people who were actually working for the CIA and the mob at that time, to kill Castro, and how they were then pivoted to this, some of them were pivoted to this new project. And my father, a week before he died, told one of his closest friends, Pete Hamill, who you may have known, but he was...
Pete Hamill, the journalist?
Yeah, the journalist.
Yeah, of course.
He told Pete Hamill said, what are you going to do about the CIA? And my father said, I'm going to separate the plans division from espionage, and that's the only way to make it work. And that still makes a lot of sense today. Incidentally, I had dinner with Mike Pompeo, 3 weeks ago, and he said something really interesting to me.
Wait, you had dinner with Mike Pompeo
in
3
Las
weeks
Vegas.
ago?
Yeah. And he said something.
What was that like?
It was the weirdest dinner I've ever been to. If I told you the other people were at that dinner.
Well, because I just can't imagine I know Mike Pompeo. I'm not attacking Mike Pompeo, but I can't imagine two people with more different views.
No, I've always, I have a kind of natal hostility toward Mike Pompeo, but I never knew him. But just because he was, for people who don't know, he was the CIA director and he was Secretary of State under Trump. But he's an interesting guy.
He's smart.
Very smart. He's Harvard. I think he went to Harvard Law School.
He did.
Harvard undergrad, and then I think he had a military career.
Army officer. Yep.
And he, he's by all. On paper, he's kind of a great American. By all, his CV is extraordinary. And you never know. You make judgments about people before you meet them. And my judgment about him, I still don't know what to think of him. But what he said.
So wound up at dinner. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Bobby Kennedy and Mike Pompeo in Vegas at dinner. If I'd stumbled across that, I would have stopped.
It wasn't just the two of us. It was me. The rest of the group makes the story even weirder. So I'm not even gonna. I don't know if I'll even go there. But he said to me before dinner, I had a moment with him, and he said to me, when I was at the CIA, I did not do what I should have done to fix that agency. And he said, and he was expressing regret, and he said. And then he turned to me and looked me dead in the eye, and he said, the entire upper echelon of that agency is made up of individuals who do not believe in the democratic institutions of the United States of America. That's a quote.
But so it was Mike Pompeo who convinced Trump not to release the file, and it was a guy who worked for Mike Pompeo texted me the day after I revealed that those files showed CIA complicity in your uncle's death, which they do, because I talked to someone who read them, and I said that on Fox News, and I got a text from a guy who works for Mike Pompeo informing me that I had just broken federal law, and that anyone who had told me that was a felon, because we had revealed classified information. And I said, wait a second, that classified information suggests the U.S. government was involved in the murder of an American president. Yeah, that's Mike Pompeo's position on that.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit weird for him to say, I think.
Well, there's 1 billion documents classified.
Yeah, I know.
Top secret. So, they can call it, they can stamp that stamp on anything they want to. That's a lawyer's
incredible
trick, to put.
And he was also behind convincing Trump not to pardon Assange.